Well, hello everybody, and thanks for joining us on this video conference. We are doing a number of these with other local government officials as well, and it's our goal is to have a dialogue and discussion to answer questions that are coming up as you guys try to manage through this new normal. From our perspective, there are a couple of things we want to start out with just as by way of setting the table for some discussion. The first is our office is well situated to operate in this pandemic. Before this all happened, about 600 of our 800 employees operated remotely. Most of them are up and going without any hitches. Our audits are continuing as normal. We're hitting the same number of audit releases as we did last year and 2 years ago. But we're adapting just like everybody else. The technology here is an example of that. We hope it works seamlessly, but if there's a glitch, just bear with us. A couple of things on the call. First, if you want to participate and ask a question, we really encourage that. It's a lot more fun if this is a discussion and not a lecture. And so click the raise your hand button right there on your thing. Raise your hand. We'll get information and we'll put you on. And when we do call on you, just unmute your local mic and we'll be good to go. And those are the best parts of the calls or the questions. And secondly, the second thing we want to talk about is to give you a little heads up of what's going to happen from a fiscal standpoint. The exact numbers are still in limbo. We're changing every day. We're taking a look at different things. But the governor asked people in the state to anticipate for the fiscal year. Remember, the state fiscal year ends July 31st. And to the extent that the state fiscal year ends July 31st, it's very difficult to adapt for problems that happen in March, April, May, June, because those time periods are what they are. So the governor asked everybody to do a 20% reduction in GRF, non-personal line items. We did that in the auditor's office. It wasn't easy, but we're going to do that. We anticipate a similar reduction in the next fiscal year, which starts July 1st. We think that's a good benchmark for everybody. If you anticipate and plan for 20%, it may be more. But it certainly could be in that mark and as a reasonable range. Particularly those of you who have non-property tax revenues. If you have a school district income tax, you should anticipate two things are going to happen. One, the moving of the tax day from April to July is going to delay your receipt of those funds. That is in the state about 30% of the state's revenue, so that's pretty close to your revenue as well, most likely. And so if you were to anticipate you're going to have a delay in those funds, depending on the time they're collected and dispersed from when you normally would expect them based on an April pay date, you're going to see that just delay in your revenues coming out. The second thing about the income taxes, we know is 20% of our workforce is unemployed. You're going to see those income tax collections fall precipitously. That is going to make a difference. There are a couple of you out there that have some sales tax issues, but even if you don't have a direct sales tax issue, your state does. And we anticipate that the sales tax revenues are going to be down significantly. The one random factor here is we don't know what the online sales tax collection's doing, the Amazon tax, for lack of a better term. But we know the auto sales are going to be down between 30 and 40%, maybe a little more. Hopefully that's short term. Hopefully that bounces back. But as we start to come out of this, but certainly for late March and April, those numbers are going to be down. Overall sales taxes, people aren't shopping, they're not buying, they're not spending sales tax. So from that perspective, it's an interesting discussion as to what that's going to mean. What this means to you in the next year's budget and this year's budget is an open question. That's really a better question for the governor and the legislature, but you need to plan for some reductions. I would not tell you that in the short term for this fiscal year, you're probably going to get a significant reduction, but I haven't heard anybody talking about that. I think the governor's going to have to likely use the state's rainy day fund. We're happy we funded that. Happy that the Senate a few years ago increased the rainy day fund levels from 5% to 8.5%. Everybody said, oh, that's unnecessary, that's too much. Well, now we're looking and saying it's probably more than necessary. We think that the state could use upwards of half the rainy day fund just balancing this fiscal year. And we're hearing holes going forward to upwards of $6 billion for the next fiscal year. So those are significant numbers. The state rainy day fund's just shy of $3 billion, to put that in perspective. So short term, this fiscal year, it's an open question as to what your adjustments are going to be. I think there's a case that probably not going to be much with regard to K-12. Going forward next year, I think you should plan for some adjustments, but that's going to be a question for the governor and the legislature. Having said that, let's go ahead and open it up for some discussion. The first question we have is from April. She doesn't have a microphone. The question is, so should we figure out a 20% reduction in our state foundation payments? It's an open question. I think that's a question you need to start having with your legislators and with the governor. I don't know that there's an answer out there. I know there are some people from the legislature's policy unit on here. In the short term, my guess is the answer is no. But certainly going to the next fiscal year, I would be surprised if the legislature is able to do no adjustments to the budget that was already passed. I think that's going to be something that is out there. If you want to ask a question, you want to participate in the discussion, there's a raise your hand button on the queue right in front of you. Just press it, and our people will get you on the call as soon as we can. These work a lot better when we have questions and discussions. We also want to make sure we know what's going on in your world, so we can see what's happening at ground level. Hopefully your teachers and your faculty are interacting with students, learning still going on. I've got a 14-year-old and a 12-year-old. I know they've done a couple of video conferences, but I was surprised that more teachers aren't doing online lectures for the students to participate. I know that's happening in some locations more than others, but as we get into this new normal, depending on what happens in the fall, I think we're going to be preparing to do more and more of that. A lot of hands are being raised, so be patient. Our first question is Joyce Kinsman. Joyce from Swanton Schools. Joyce, you're on the line. Go ahead and unmute your button and welcome.
Sure. I guess one of my questions was, I'm sorry, I just lost it. I'm gonna pass out. I'm gonna pass on.
Are you all right?
Yep, I'm good.
Okay, well, stay safe. Swanton's keep doing what you're doing. It's important we get the kids' education. Our next question is from Nicole. Hold it. Our next question is from Marshall. Nicole Marshall. Sorry, my questioner's slow on the typing. Nicole, you're on the line.
Thank you, Auditor Faber. I'm Nicole Marshall. I'm the treasurer with Westerville City School District. I was curious if you could talk about the date being moved for the property tax, the second half property taxes. You mentioned that. Has a decision been made on that? I know Franklin and Delaware County have both requested the tax commissioner to extend that to, I think, August 20th. So I didn't know if you had any information about that.
Great question. We've had conversations with the tax commissioner. He is generally not in favor of moving tax collection dates unless there's a reason inside the community to move those tax collection dates, like meaning the auditor or the treasurer's office don't have the ability to get stuff out. Our office position is on tax collection deferrals or delays. It ought to be a case-by-case basis. Certainly there are individuals who are impacted by the coronavirus, landlords whose tenants aren't paying rent, those kind of things. We think that it's perfectly appropriate to give those individuals case-by-case flexibility and deferments, waive late penalties, allow delayed payments, those kind of things. But as across the board, there are a lot of entities that, for example, a lot of mortgage companies that are escrowing those payments for property taxes. Why do they need a deferral? They've got it sitting in the bank. Go ahead and send it in. We think that stuff is very appropriate. It's going to be a revenue issue. We want to make sure you guys have your revenue. Other local governments have their revenue. So that's our office's position. We think it ought to be a case-by-case, not an across the board, but certainly local auditors and treasurers are trying to balance with their ability to get the bills out and get money collected. And so that's where they're at. I know the question is on the availability from the tax commissioner who has to approve that. They do have some discretion to do a temporary delay, and that may be where Franklin County and Delaware County are. And I know that may be a more localized thing. We talked to the Franklin County auditor, and he's doing his best. And so we're just gonna tell you to talk to them and play by ear. Hopefully that answers your question, but sorry, I can't give you a more definitive answer.
Thank you.
Our next question is Tonya Boyd. Tonya, are you there?
Hi, good morning. Yes, I am.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you for hosting. I'm not certain that you would be the appropriate person to ask this question, but many of my board members and constituents are following up on the federal funding via the CARES Act that K-12 schools are to receive. I've been keeping abreast on the governor's notes on it, and everything I read just indicates that we're still waiting for the money to come in from the feds, and then once distributed by them, that the governor will then work with K-12 schools to get funds distributed. Any updates on where that stands at all?
Yeah, that we're not in that loop. I can tell you we're going to be auditing after the fact. So I would just tell you, when you get the money, make sure you spend it exactly as required and under the terms. Although we have asked our auditors to use maximum flexibility where we can on audit issues. And if you have questions in there, we'll happy to elaborate. But when you have an audit question with regard to either the CARES Act money or other things, public records, those kind of things, public meetings, don't forget, we also have on the line James Coyne and our regional customer service reps. Hopefully you know your local person. Feel free to reach out to them and ask them if you have an audit type question in that area. But with regard to the distribution of the money, we will be happy to forward that question on to the governor's folks and encourage them to get an answer back to your association. But that's that money will not be flowing through our office, so we don't have any say in that. So
Great. I appreciate you answering the question. Have a great day, Steve.
sorry to not be able to answer the question, but we'll forward that one on.
No worries. Thank you.
Next question is from Andrea Meyer. Andrea, welcome to the conference.
I'm wondering about furloughing. What's the feeling on furloughing employees potentially for the fall, like state, school aides, bus drivers, that kind of thing?
Well, the question is how do we balance what's going to be necessary? Obviously we want to encourage that to a minimum, but if it's necessary, it's necessary. You're going to have to make a business case and a business decision in that regard of what you need to do to balance and where your essential staff are going to be. In the short term, we've encouraged people to try and retain people. School districts have a special statutory provision to continue to pay people during epidemics. Other local governments don't have that provision. We would encourage that you try and keep people productive. I know you're all doing that, but from that perspective, we would encourage you to do everything you can to minimize your risk of staff, but you're going to have to balance. And if we do get a reduction in your funding from the legislature and or from the feds, and it's not made up somewhere, staffing is going to be one of the factors you have to take into consideration. Certainly your collective bargaining agreements are going to limit your abilities there, but you're going to have to take that into consideration. And there's just no good answer there. So hopefully I touched on that. Did I get your answer?
Yes, thank you.
All right, our next question is Mike Robinson, who sent in a question. When will the fiscal year 19 audits be wrapped up? Is 5/31 the new deadline? And we will get you that answer. I don't know that right off the top. I know we'll have the answer before the end of this call. Mike, somebody is working on getting me that answer. I know Bob Hinkle, my chief deputy auditor, was listening in on this call, and hopefully he brings me that answer for that level of specificity. I know we are extending deadlines. We did a 30-day automatic extension, but certainly if you're an IPA client, the answer might be different than if you're one of our clients, and we'll get you a specific answer. If you ask me the district, if you give that information as well, we can certainly help get that answer directly. Karen Phillips. Karen, you're on. Karen, are you there?
No, sir, I didn't have anything. I must have clicked that button by mistake. Sorry.
Well, Karen, hopefully you're doing okay. Is everybody staying safe? Where are you from?
I'm from Cary in Wyandotte County.
Good. How's everything in Wyandotte County?
Oh, well, we're doing okay. We're working remotely for the most part.
Good. Are your kids still getting educated? Are your teachers finding this new normal as stressful as my wife, who's a math professor at one of the colleges?
Well, I think they're all stressed. My daughter teaches 6th grade, but we were positioned very well because we had a Chromebook for every one of our 850 students.
That's awesome.
So they've all got them at home, and we had to purchase a few hotspots so that some of the kids who didn't have access to Wi-Fi could get that. But it's going very well. We were positioned very well, so we're grateful for that.
That's good. That's good. Our kids in our school district, only the middle school had Chromebooks, and so that's going to be a little bit more difficulty for them to work through, but I think they're working through it. So thanks for joining us. Thanks for participating. Next is Cooper Martin from Richmond Heights. Cooper, are you there? Cooper, they're saying you need to unmute. We'll come back to Cooper. Dan Levengood. Dan, are you there? Dan's the next one. Are you there, Dan? All right. How about Greg Marcus? Greg, are you there? We'll leave Cooper and Dan on the call list, and if we can get back to them, we'll try. Are you
Hi,
there,
Auditor
Greg?
Faber.
Hey, there you are.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you holding up?
Not bad, not bad. Just checking in here from Rocky River Schools. Question that I know a lot of my colleagues have been asking regarding supplemental contracts, specifically for this spring season. Obviously, that would typically go to our bargaining agreements for teachers and non-certified. Does the auditor state have a position on paying a percentage of those contracts based on work performed, or is that going to be totally a local decision with council and the unions?
Basically, it's going to be a local decision. With regard to these kind of things, we're allowing maximum flexibility. Obviously, we have on the one hand some concerns if you're being paid supplemental for work that's not necessary and not being done anymore. I think that's appropriate to negotiate some kind of an adjustment. But in most of your supplementals, I'm just thinking of spring sports, some work was done. I've got a freshman and a 7th grader. Their baseball coach or their softball coach and their track coach had worked with the kids, had prepared for the season. And where do you draw the line? I think I could make a justification to pay all of that, or certainly pay half of that. But you're going to have to justify it. Whatever you do, what I would encourage you to do is to make an administrative and your board vote on that or approve that, and just certify that and put it in your records. And we'll use that for auditing. We'll accept whatever you do. As I said to other local governments, school districts have more authority to pay people during this time period than other local governments. But what we're doing with regard to those local governments, as long as you keep a documented record of what the people did for the services that you paid them, we're not going to micromanage or second guess that. Now, I said in one example, if what you're saying their services are, they need to write their name on a piece of paper every day, and we'll pay them for 8 hours for doing that, that's probably not reasonable. But as long as you make a good faith, reasonable argument, we'll certainly give that due deference. And certainly during this audit period, we're going to make notes that say, look, here's what the statute was, here's what they did. And if you have a document that says we did X because of the coronavirus and the governor shut down, we're certainly going to take that into consideration. But the statute, don't forget, the statute does authorize you to pay teachers and I think some bus drivers during epidemics. So that's authority that local governments don't have.
Thank you.
Our next participant is Stacy Overly. Stacy, go ahead and unmute, and welcome to our conference. Are you there, Stacy? All right, we're going to put you back in the queue, Stacy. Brad McCracken, did I say your name? Eastwood Schools.
Yeah, yes, that's correct.
Thanks, Brad. Thanks for joining us. How's everything in Eastwood?
Sunny and warm finally. It's been kind of cold up here.
Yeah.
Hey, I appreciate the time.
Hey, Brad, if you think about it, I'm going to ask you to also comment. We'll talk about whatever you want to talk about, but also comment on whether you guys are able to meet electronically or whether you guys are using that new statutory authority that we helped get the legislature to pass. What's on your mind?
We did pass the statutory authority at the last board meeting, but we all met in person.
Okay.
But we have the flexibility to go forward, which we do appreciate very much.
Good. Well, the legislature worked with us to get that out there. We're very happy they did that. I just encourage everybody, make sure you're recording those electronics. If you do meet electronically, make sure you record it and put it on your website, or make sure the public has access to it. You'll be good.
I've got just, if I can, 3 brief questions.
Sure.
I want to clarify your comment on the April 30th school district tax distribution. I think the context was portion of that could be delayed in terms of payment received, could be delayed until the July payment, but there is still a 4/30 payment coming to schools, correct?
I think you might be confusing what I'm talking about income tax collection. The April 15th tax day for income tax was kicked to July
Right.
15th. And so that's going to delay all of that tax collection time period. To the extent that they got revenues in, I assume they'll try and distribute them.
Right.
Some people paid anyway, and so they will keep that on the normal distribution. But upwards of 30% of the state's income tax revenue comes during that April 15th deadline. And so from that perspective, you should just anticipate that there's going to be a hit to that. And if your revenue tracks the same, and I imagine it does, you're going to see a fall off in the money that's available, and that will be collected after July 15th. And so that's going to be a cash flow issue for most districts.
Right.
Can I answer that question?
Yep, you did. Thank you. The spring supplemental question was just asked before I came on. Our board took the position, as you were saying, that most of the work had already been initiated and chose to pass a resolution to pay all spring supplementals.
As long as they documented, I love the fact that they passed a resolution to go ahead and pay that. They documented that they believed that there was substantial completion, and I think we'll accept that.
So the only thing we did possibly have to do is to have people create some documentation of what work that they had done, or would the board resolution cover that?
I would like to see, look, we always like more. We're the auditor. Come on. If you can give me 10 pieces of paper to justify one, we want 10. So
phrase that differently.
The more you do, the easier it is to justify. But again, I've asked our people to use maximum flexibility when auditing during this period and when auditing this period. And so to the extent that you can document and justify what you did with a board resolution and common sense, that's going to go a long way to taking care of what we need.
The last thing perhaps isn't really for you, but maybe some influence with the Department of Taxation. I've tried to get some data from Department of Taxation to model, say, ag levels of income versus residential payers and perhaps some employer groupings, not necessarily the employer. Their position has always been that is private information. We will not give you any of that information, which really makes it difficult to model in a situation like this what kind of revenue projections I can make from our school district income tax. Is there anything that can be done to get that kind of data in somewhat aggregate form? Because they're concerned about us knowing exactly who the payer is, which we don't want.
We will put that on our list of communications. So I had a great call with the tax commissioner half hour, an hour, or end of last week, talking about some of these issues that we got from county auditors. We'll put that on our list for them as well. One of the things that the county auditors wanted was a better heads up on the sales tax. Not necessarily most of your issues, but it is a representation. And basically the problem that the tax commissioner has is they only have about a 15-day window from when they receive the data. Because remember, everything's paid 30 days in arrears to get the information out. So it's just going to take them 45 to 60 days to get that information out, and they're going to try and do it on the short end for the auditors on the sales tax. My guess is getting this information to you is going to be equally difficult for them in the short term because they're trying to operate in the new normal, but we'll put it on the list and certainly ask them for it. Does that help?
Yes, it does. Thank you, sir.
All right. Thanks for doing what you're doing. Next, we have Stacy Overly, who has no mic but has a question. What documentation will audit staff be looking at next year if schools continue to pay non-regular employees, such as timesheet personnel, supplemental contracts, et cetera? For example, board resolution and/or agreements with unions. Well, first of all, to the extent that you have statutory authority in those two classes for faculty and certain bus drivers, the statute's going to be your authority, but you do need a board resolution. You do need authority. For other people who are classified, what you need to do is justify what they were doing for the benefit of the organization. The same information we're giving to local governments who do not have that statutory authority is saying, look, if you've got somebody that you need to retain and that you're not laying off and you want to have them, you're going to have them do X, Y, and Z during the day. We're not going to go micromanage. Did that take 4 hours or did that take 8 hours? But we are going to look to see that you are getting some value to the organization from that person's services, to the extent that you determine what that value is. Now, board resolution is going to be very essential, and then management review is going to also be essential. So make sure that the management is doing what they need to do to document the value of that person. And that's the flexibility that we're going to be able to give. Now, certainly we will note and any discrepancies that this was the COVID time period, and this is a time period where people were being encouraged to be kept on, and they were operating for the good of the entity, and the entity made a determination for the best interest of public policy to keep these people engaged in this capacity. But again, document the heck out of that. So hopefully that answers the question. Next question is from Gina Delpert. Deepert? Northmore? Gina, how are you? Gina, apparently we're coming back. You're self-muted. Larry Johnson from Cleveland. Larry, are you there?
Hello?
Larry, there you are. Larry, how you doing?
Good. Cleveland Schools is who I'm representing. I have a question around, do you expect or anticipate any changes or easing of fiscal caution, watch, or emergency legislations and actions from your office?
No, probably not. What we did, for example, though, is entities that were in fiscal watch or fiscal emergency that were heading out the other side, we delayed removing them from fiscal watch or fiscal emergency because it's tough for me to say that we can have confidence in the revenue projections that we were using to remove people from fiscal watch and fiscal emergency. So ultimately, it's probably going to be the inverse. We anticipate that we're going to have more people that we're concerned with as the revenues come into a caution. The education side of fiscal watch and fiscal emergency is a little different picture than it is for local governments. You know, we're certainly going to anticipate an increased need for our services and our help through local government, our LGS folks, and our performance audit team. By the way, if you get into or you anticipate that you're going to be getting into fiscal emergency or fiscal watch or have financial issues, don't forget our local government service folks are out there to help. To the extent that we can help early, sometimes we can avoid even getting into that designation. And so please, please, please use our services. Reach out to our customer service people if you think that's going to be helpful. But look, I can't in good faith look at a forecast that anticipates no revenue loss like we did in February, January, because we didn't know this was coming, and have the same answer now. And so we have deferred and delayed removing people that are in that condition that we thought were getting close to coming out until we can have a better assessment. And so that would be the short-term impact. Hopefully I answered your question. Did we get it, or do you still need more?
No, good, thank you.
Thanks for joining us. Our next participant in the conference is Janet. Janet from Poland Schools in Mahoning County. Janet, Mahoning County was hit pretty hard. How are you guys doing?
We're doing okay, Mr. Faber. How are you?
I'm good.
Good. My question is in regards to the supplementals as well. I guess I'm a little bit not sure now. I thought I was sure, but maybe I'm not after we're having some conversation. So because all of our people had already received contracts, the board had adopted those contracts and contracts were signed and returned. When we got to the topic of the spring sports, it was my understanding that we only needed to take it back to our board and do a resolution if we weren't paying our people the whole contract. I already put the steps in place to get, like you said, the documentation from all of those spring people to say how they have, fulfilled the contract and those types of things. But because we're paying our coaches the whole amount, I didn't believe that we needed to take it back to our board. Is that going to be a problem during the audit?
I would prefer that you guys go get the board to ratify that, make that decision so that it's clear that the board authorized that decision. That way the board made the decision that even though there was only partial performance under the contract, because of the circumstances, we were deeming that as full performance and going to pay them. I just think that additional legislative authority is helpful and adds an extra step. Now, if you didn't have that, is it fatal? Probably not. The fact that you've got the other documentation probably is going to suffice, but it
Okay.
just would be nicer if you would go ahead and get that board. And frankly, if you made that decision, my guess is the board's okay with ratifying it.
Mm-hmm. All right, very good. Thank you for your time.
Okay. Next is Gina. Gina from Northmore. It says Mike's not working or doesn't have one. Will your staff continue to work remotely through the month of May? My staff's anticipating working remotely through the month of June. As I mentioned, of our 800 employees, 600 worked remotely before this. We're going to allow people to come in and meet as necessary using the social distancing rules. Just like this room here, I've got some of my people in the room, but we're all socially distanced and we're all spaced out. Where possible, we've instructed our people to continue to work remotely. On your audits, they may need documents or records. They're going to ask you to pull those and make them available to them, and then they'll go pick them up, trying to maintain social distance. Where it's not possible, we're asking that those be small group meetings and that they continue to be safe and use social distancing. But that's what we're doing to adjust, complying with the governor's requests. And we think we're uniquely situated to comply and to get that done. So hopefully that answers your question. Next question is from Ryan Lockwood of Springfield. Ryan, welcome to the conference.
Hi, thank you, sir. Can you hear me?
I can. Thanks for joining us.
My question was in regards to maybe some further guidance on donations, both inflowing and outflowing in the district. Obviously, when we first got in this crunch, PPE was a big discussion, and we had some resources on hand that we could donate out to the community, some private, some public. And then the other side, we've been getting a lot of people wanting to help us, whether it's our teachers directly through gift cards. I just don't want to break any laws in this pandemic.
Short answer, I don't know the answer to that. We will get you the answer and get that to your association. My gut says on like everything, document the heck out of what you're doing. To the extent that you made donations from school district resources to other governmental entities, I think that's probably justifiable and easily identifiable. Just make sure you're tracking it as to what it was and where it went, and make sure. I always said in an earlier call, I love two-party verification. So if you've got two people verifying you did something, it's always good to have a second signature or a second person verifying and giving the list. On accepting donations, I think you need to track those like you do every other asset. If a person gives gift cards for your teachers, I think you have to distribute them according to the intent of the teacher, the donor, but make sure you track where they went so somebody doesn't argue, well, hey, we got all these gift cards from McDonald's, but they all ended up in the treasurer's. Treasurer's family's eating McDonald's for the next 3 years. Make sure you just keep that stuff at bay and keep track of that. And I think if you keep track of it and document what you did and what you received, it will go a long way to easing any concerns there. But we will get you a defined answer. Apparently, I gave the right answer. I'm getting a thumbs up from my guys who have Bob Hinkle on the line, and Bob communicated with our folks saying, hey, Faber actually got one right for a change.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. And thank you for doing what you're doing. To thank your teachers for keeping kids educated. Chelsea Baldwin. Chelsea, you're the next joiner here in our conference. Thanks for joining us. Chelsea, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you? Can you hear me?
Good. Where are you from?
West Liberty, Salem.
Thank you. How's everything up there?
We're doing well. We had our high school kids were already on one-to-one iPads, so they are totally prepared for it. And our middle school kids, we have enough iPads in the building to send home with them. And then we had some excess iPad carts in the elementary, so we've even got elementary kids home working on iPads, and we did have to buy hotspots. So it's certainly not perfect by any stretch, but I feel like we are at least we're headed in the right direction here.
That's great.
Yeah. My question is more of a clarification of a question that somebody had asked earlier, and that was about the timesheet folks. Like your non-certified bus drivers and cafeteria workers and such. Did I hear you say that we also need a board resolution to continue paying them, or does the state law kind of allow us that opportunity?
One, I think even if the state law allows it, a board resolution helps you. Okay. I think even for everybody who's not quote unquote working their same normal schedule, you probably need board authorization to clarify that. Just because the statute says you can doesn't say the statute says you will. And so I think you need to make sure you clarify that. Get legal counsel from your legal counsel, but it's always safer to have that board resolution. Okay.
Okay.
Secondly, document what they're doing. If you have them doing something, you know, looking at whatever it happens to be, document the heck out of that, particularly for the non people who aren't directly covered by the statute. Again, we're going to give you maximum flexibility, but you have to work with us. You have to give us something so that we can say we use flexibility and that the board made the decision as a management decision.
Okay, great. Thank
Okay.
you for that clarification.
Sure. Next, we have Eva Elliott. Eva, you're the next caller, or I guess it's not caller, it's a video conference. You're the next participant. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Thank
Good.
you
Where are you
for having me today. I just wanted to verify what you told another caller. Did you say that the board needed to do a board resolution to pay the teachers in classified during this period of time?
You have statutory authority for certain officials. Rely on your legal counsel as to who those you have statutory authority for. I would prefer, it would be a lot cleaner, that you have a board resolution identifying what the board is instructing the superintendent and the business officials to do under that authority. Because remember, this is a different circumstance than teachers showing up and teaching class from 7:30 to 3. This is a different circumstance. It just needs to be clarified. The fact you have authority to do it doesn't necessarily indicate you are doing it. And so again, we just think that it's easier if you have that board resolution and that authority clarifying your policies and the reason for your policies. It should be relatively straightforward. Certainly for those people who are not directly covered by the statute, you need to have a history of authority as to why you're paying them, how you're paying them, what they're participating, and what they're doing. It doesn't mean you can't. It just means you have to take a little extra steps to justify it and have good records. Did I answer your question?
Yes.
Where are you from?
We are from Manchester, Ohio, down in Adams County.
Good. How are things down there? What are you seeing? How's your community? Is it ready to get open?
Well, we haven't seen a whole lot of the coronavirus down here. And as for the community, well, we're just suffering a major loss in valuation due to the sale of the 2 power plants.
Right.
And so we're dealing with that right now.
So you've got multiple factors you're trying to deal with all at once.
Absolutely.
Well, stay safe, keep educating kids, and if our people can be helpful, make sure you reach out to them. Don't forget our LGS people are there, not just when you get in fiscal watch or fiscal emergency, but as things start having questions, don't forget that they're there to help.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Next is Jason Fleming from Ridgedale.
Hi, how are you?
Good, Jason. How are you doing?
Fantastic. I just want to circle back to this statute on paying staff again. You mentioned a couple times that there's certain bus drivers that you can pay, and you said it's something that we can do. When I read these laws, one says must pay, the other one says shall pay. So I'm a little bit confused as to why there needs to be any resolution or documentation if this is a teaching or non-teaching contracted individual.
Again, it doesn't apply to every person in the school district's employ. They are limited by the statutes. And look, I just think your board resolutions would be helpful to explain that's what you're doing in the new normal.
No,
Again, I think I mentioned that if you don't do it, is it fatal? No, document the heck out of what you're doing. But we think it would be helpful and would clean it up.
Can you elaborate on who you might be talking about? Because if we're not paying anybody, that we're limiting it to those that are contracted employees. If you're an as-needed employee, you're only getting paid for what you work. When the governor said essential and staff only, I think that opens this up to anyone who's contracted that's not essential shall be paid per code.
Well, again, you're going to have to get a legal advice on that. Our interpretation is that there are employees within the schools and certainly within other local governments that are not statutorily covered. And to the extent that that's the case, we asked the legislature specifically to give authority to the governing body to pay those individuals. The legislature has not yet done that. We are interpreting, however, as long as you have made a good faith basis with regard to those non-specific individuals, and are documenting what you're doing, that we're not going to micromanage those decisions and look to see, did they actually spend 8 hours doing that? So again, you're going to have to make that decision. There are districts out there that have decided, and I'm not hearing what you're doing specifically. I think what I heard you say is, other than those specific contracted individuals, you are not paying other individuals. There are districts that have decided they're going to. There are local communities that have decided that they're doing that instead of laying people off. And so we're trying to give you maximum flexibility based on your giving your governmental body, meaning your school board, some discretion in doing that. We think it would be cleaner if the legislature would make this very clear. But to our knowledge, this is one of the first times in recent memory that this provision, particularly those provisions as addressed to the schools, have been tested. Did we answer your question?
Yeah, I get, yeah.
Here, let me ask it a different way. If you're correct and a resolution isn't necessary, what's the harm in getting the resolution? If, on the other hand, somebody comes in and determines that a resolution was necessary and you didn't do it, there is certainly a harm in that. And so we're taking the error. We always like more paper. We think that in some cases it's better to err and treat things consistently and make it clear what you're doing. Certainly to verify the business side of it through the governmental body or the legislative body, your school board, we think is a good, safe practice to do.
I hear you. I just used to work for you guys for about a decade, and I follow always audited to the code, to a T all the time. And this seems to reach beyond that, and it kind of is opposite of what we've been hearing from the beginning. I mean, I don't have a problem with it. I just seems like unnecessary work.
Well, again, we hopefully when you audited for us, you always liked more, not less. And so from that perspective, that's where we're operating from that perspective. Now, I think I was clear on this. If it's not there, is it fatal? No, but it's certainly helpful. And in our view, we are auditing, and I've instructed our people with regard to coronavirus auditing, maximum flexibility. We like to see things that we can justify to give and use that flexibility. And the more we see, the more flexible we can be, particularly where in the areas to where the statute isn't as clear as to what applies. And there are certain issues around certain employees that it is not clear. We asked for the legislature to clarify that, and maybe they will when they come back here in May. Next call is Cooper Martin from Richmond Heights. Cooper, are you there? Cooper, if you could unmute, we'd love to have you. All right, here's a written question from Heather Kramer. I have an IPA, conduct my audit in the past. When will you decide if you're taking my audit back in-house or continue to contract it out for the current fiscal year? If you plan to continue to contract it out, do you plan to do the RFPs? The answer is yes. Most of that will continue on as the existing process. I don't know where you're at in the contract process. Normally, we are doing those and we haven't changed much. Depending on what happens from a fiscal matter, we actually may send some more out for IPA, but we're in the process of making those determinations based on our existing staffing. But for right now, that's not likely to change much. So if you have questions specifically, contact our customer service rep, our regional rep, whoever that happens to be in your area. If you're not sure, you can always email us, Keith at ohioauditor.gov, Keith@ohioauditor.gov, and we'll try and get you an answer specifically on your case. So Heather, I don't see which district you're from, but if we could figure that out and have somebody from the region contact them about what we're doing, particularly with their audit. Lorena from Champion Local Schools in Trumbull County. How are you today, Lorena? You got to unmute, Lorena. There you go. Welcome.
Thank you very much for hosting this session. I greatly appreciate it.
Sure.
I have a question regarding what recommendations do you have for treasurers as far as fiscal year 20 audit would be. What are the areas that you're sharing with your staff that are the target points? And specifically, and in addition to that, many of us are now hosting our board meetings virtually. What requirements are you hoping that you're looking for? Because I'm sure you're going to go in and expect that most board meetings were held virtually. What types of things will your staff be looking for, or recommendations? Any info would be greatly appreciated.
Sure. I'll answer the last part first. Yeah, we actually got the legislature to add the emergency provisions to do your board meetings remotely, and to use telephone and video conferencing. The big thing we're going to be looking for is, did the public have reasonable access to the meeting? We're encouraging that everybody record every one of those meetings and post the recordings, preferably on your website, but make the public have access to those recordings. Certainly you want to continue to keep your minutes and make good documentation of what your minutes say, but we want to make sure that you're posting those recordings. Preferably, people are getting the same advance notice and they're told how to participate, whether it's a Zoom conference, here's the Zoom login, whether it's a video teleconference, here's the call-in numbers to participate, that the public participation in the meetings stayed consistent and was available. And that's what the recording will document. Most of those platforms have a pretty straightforward recording feature, and it's relatively straightforward to keep those recordings and post them. So that's the big thing. The bigger thing is to make sure you continue to follow the proper procedures, that you're not meeting in executive session when you don't need to be, that you're continuing to make sure the public can see what you're doing and you're conducting business. We think for most, it's going to be a real advantage to do technology-based meetings. And I think it should make things flow easier and certainly keep people safe. So hopefully, did I answer your question? Hopefully, Lorena, we got.
You did. Thank you. I mean, we are, if we are simply posting our minutes, our printed minutes on our webpage, does that also meet the requirement?
It is a base meeting of the requirement. We would prefer that you post the recordings or make the recordings available.
Thank you.
I know some people on our last call weren't actually doing the recordings. We encourage that. We think that that's an expectation, certainly, of the legislation. So we're not going to, the world's not going to end because you didn't record the first couple of meetings. But going forward, as people get knowledge and you start figuring out how to do this, look, this is a learning curve. And that's why I say we're auditing with maximum flexibility.
Thank you very much. Any other items that you're sharing with your staff regarding the fiscal year 20 audit? Besides maximum flexibility.
Yeah, the first thing about this is that we're going to go back to the legislature and ask them to give us extra flexibility in making a determination of what the nature of each one of these audits are for the period. They gave us flexibility, but they gave us flexibility as it only applies to auditing the COVID period. And you all know that most of that's not going to be done for a year or 2 years, depending on the entity. And so we may not need flexibility in how we do that, and whether it's an AUP or a full audit. But for most of you, that's not going to apply anyway. So from that perspective, we're asking for the legislature to give us some more discretion. As far as identifying items during this time period, we're going to have to see what comes up as we go through this. But right now, our basic instruction to our audit team is use common sense, give them flexibility. As long as they're documenting what they did, why they did, and how they did it. If we see a non-compliance, we're going to have to note the non-compliance, but we will also, with that note that this was during Corona, this is why they did what they did, and this is the circumstances that we think alleviates the non-compliance, and so, or justifies the non-compliance. And so that's the approach we're going to take, and that's why I say keep having your school boards, your official governing body, verify what you're doing. It's going to go a long way if your public body identifies, justifies, explains what you're doing to helping make sure that this is in the true public purpose and public need. So that would be my number one side. Err on the side of going above and beyond by having your school board adopt and approve what you're doing.
Thank you very much.
Yep. Dan, you're up. Are you there? Dan Levengood. Dan, we were having problems earlier. If you want to go ahead and submit your call, if you get on, just say hi. We're up. We have a lot of submitted questions. We will get the answers to the extent we can and distribute them through your association. Again, we want maximum information exchange. This is helpful to us to know what questions you're seeing and what you're seeing out there. So if you've submitted a written question that we weren't able to get to, we will try and get your get your answer and submit it to the association as well. Our last call, our last participant, Trevor. Trevor, I'm not even going to try and say your Goomery. Trevor, are you on the call? Trevor, you're on the call. It says your line's open. Welcome to the conference. All right. We're gonna hopefully, Trevor, you can get your question submitted and we'll try and get an answer. Our last person is going to be James from OASBO. James, are you there?
Yes, I am, Auditor Faber. Thank you very much for hosting this webinar today.
Thank you. Hopefully it was somewhat informative.
It's very informative, and I just once again want to thank you, as well as Bob Hinkle, for everything you do for this organization, participating in our Collaborate site to help keep our members informed on issues of relevance, and anything we can do to help facilitate conversation through that site or distribute information, we stand ready to assist, and thank you for all you do.
Thank you. And like I said, if your members have questions, get them to us. We'll do our best to answer. Some things are legal and we have to send those off to the legal shop. But generally, we want to be helpful. Don't forget, if there's something going on out there in your individual district, you're anticipating a real revenue hit, engage our local government services unit early. To the extent that they can get in and help early, it can a lot of times avoid a problem later. If it's a performance issue, we've done a lot of performance audits for districts. We've got a couple ongoing now. We're continuing to work on those. We're there to help and try and get some best practices and help out managing through the tough times. We're there. We're there to help. If you have a question that's specific and we don't get an answer to it, please reach out. We can get that to Hinkle. We can get that to our audit team and try and get you the best answer we can. Don't forget James Coyne and his regional reps are out there as well. But thanks for all the things the association does in getting information to us. James, are you still there? Or did we lose you?
Oh, no, I'm here. Thank you very much.
Okay. Well, thank you guys for helping facilitate this call. Time flew by. I thought we would be, it never stops. So thank you guys for what you're doing. We'll probably try and set another one of these up in a couple of weeks. And thanks for doing what you're doing. Thanks for educating our kids. I know the school is coming, is going to be ending here middle to end of May, depending on where you're at. And hopefully next year comes into a new normal and we can get back to where we were. Hopefully this is short term. Thanks for everybody. Thanks for doing what you're doing.